I've always been the type who arrives early at Gare du Palais, even for late-night departures. There was something comforting about the station after 10 p.m., when the crowds thinned and the loudspeakers stopped calling out delayed arrivals. On that particular night, November 3rd, 1995, a light drizzle clung to the windows, and the old stone walls reflected the street lamps like fractured mirrors. I wasn't expecting anything beyond a quiet ride home, the kind where you fall asleep before the second tunnel. That was when I noticed a bus I had never seen before. Its digital sign flickered 2213, but the glow looked strangely dim, as if weakened by the fog around it. It wasn't on any schedule I carried, and the platform was completely empty, yet the engine hummed steadily, idling as if it were waiting for someone running late. I nearly walked past it, assuming it was some internal service or maintenance vehicle. The door opened before I could ask a single question. The driver, a calm-looking man with soft gray hair and a uniform that felt slightly outdated, studied me with an expression that stopped me mid-step. It wasn't curiosity, it was recognition, the quiet kind you see on someone who's certain you should be there. Something about the way his eyes softened felt unsettling and strangely familiar at the same time. "You made it this time," he said gently, as if this were a continuation of a conversation I didn't remember starting. Before I could respond, he handed me a perforated cardboard ticket, something I hadn't seen since the late 80s. It felt warm, freshly printed. I should have turned away, or at least questioned him further. But there was something reassuring in his tone, something that suggested I had trusted him before. I climbed the steps, and the door slid shut behind me. The interior lights buzzed once, and the front display flickered, struggling to settle on a year. When the numbers finally stabilized, they didn't show 1995 anymore. They glowed a steady, impossible 1989. And in that instant, I realized the driver hadn't mistaken me for someone else. He had recognized me from a year I shouldn't have been able to return to. The first thing that struck me once I sat down wasn't fear, but a strange sense of dislocation, like waking from a nap and needing a moment to remember where you are. The interior lights were a soft yellow, warmer than the bright LEDs I was used to on modern buses. A faint scent of freshly cleaned fabric lingered in the air, something I hadn't noticed since my teenage years. The driver adjusted his mirror, not to check the platform, but to look at me, quietly confirming that I was truly there. I held the perforated cardboard ticket in my palm, turning it slowly. It felt real, solid, warm, as if it had just been stamped. But the numbers printed on it didn't match any date from 1995. They formed a sequence I couldn't place, a sequence I felt I should have recognized. Outside the window, the platform looked subtly different. The advertisements were older. The signage lacked the newer paint. Even the reflection of the station's stone facade looked cleaner, as if the building had been scrubbed of the years I knew it had endured. As the bus rolled forward, the front display flickered again, trying to stabilize the year. Each time the digits shifted, the city outside shifted with them. Storefronts changing design, billboards vanishing, newly built structures fading into older shapes. The fog seemed to move with us, hanging low like a curtain the bus kept pushing through. Nothing about the route felt wrong, yet nothing felt the same either. I thought about calling out to the driver, asking what exactly was happening, but something about his stillness kept me silent. He drove with the careful confidence of someone following a route he had memorized long ago, one that required focus, not explanation. Every turn felt deliberate, as if each street belonged to a specific version of Quebec only he could see. When he spoke again, his voice was calm enough to steady the air between us. "Don't worry," he said, eyes still on the road. "The route hasn't changed, only the year does." And for the first time, I understood that whatever this journey was, it had already started long before I boarded. If you're enjoying the story so far, don't forget to subscribe. It helps the channel more than you know. The bus moved through the quiet streets with a steady rhythm, as though nothing about the world outside had shifted at all. But the further we went, the more I realized that the details were wrong. Not dramatically, not in a way that shouted for attention, but in subtle, persistent ways that made my thoughts twist back on themselves. A restaurant I passed every morning looked newer, its sign crisp and unweathered. A convenience store that should have been lit and open at that hour stood dark, as if it hadn't yet begun staying open late. These weren't dramatic changes. They were the kind you only notice if you've spent years walking the same streets. Rain streaked across the windows in long diagonal lines, making the city blur and sharpen with each streetlight we passed. The buzz of the fluorescent tubes above me created a low hum that filled the quiet. I traced the edges of the ticket with my thumb, trying to ignore how warm it still felt. It shouldn't have bothered me as much as it did. Paper doesn't hold warmth like that for long. But this ticket felt as though it had been in someone's hand just moments before mine. The driver's posture never changed. He kept both hands gently on the wheel, eyes steady, breathing calm. Something about his presence made it difficult to ask questions. It felt like interrupting someone in the middle of a delicate task. Eventually, I forced myself to speak. "Where exactly are we going?" I asked, my voice sounding smaller in the quiet cabin. He didn't look back. "Same place as always." "That doesn't answer my question." He paused for a moment, the slightest shift of his shoulders betraying a sigh he didn't let out. "You've asked me that before," he said softly, almost as if embarrassed to admit it. "Every time, actually." The words slid into me like cold water. Every time. I didn't know how to respond. My mind searched for a memory, any memory that might explain what he meant, but all I found was the familiar pattern of my routine. Work, home, coffee, late bus rides. No loops, no missing years, no repeated conversations. The road curved, and the city shifted again. A billboard advertising a 1991 film release loomed above us, fresh, untouched by time, the colors too bright to be 4 years old. My chest tightened. "This is a joke, right?" I asked, more to myself than to him. "If it is," the driver replied, "you're the one who started it." I gripped the seat in front of me as the bus descended a ramp leading toward the lower part of the city. Fog pooled along the asphalt in slow-moving rivers. The headlights cut through it, revealing just enough of the road to stay oriented. But everything beyond that limit felt unreachable, like a memory fading before you can grasp it. A thought crept in then, unwelcome, unreasonable, but persistent. What if the driver truly did know me? Not from my past, but from his. The fog thickened as we left the main streets, turning the world outside into shifting silhouettes. The bus felt suspended in its own pocket of light, the interior humming softly, as if it were the only stable thing left. I leaned forward slightly, trying to catch more of the driver's expression in the mirror, but the angle only allowed a partial view. His eyes focused, his jaw relaxed, like someone accustomed to routines no one else understood. "Do you really expect me to believe I've been here before?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he flicked the turn signal and guided the bus down a narrow road that I couldn't place, even though I'd lived in Quebec long enough to recognize most side streets. Buildings here looked unfamiliar, older, simpler, as if their renovations had been undone. A corner shop I knew had been remodeled in '93 appeared untouched, wearing its old blue awning like a photograph come to life. "You believed it the first time," he finally said. A chill went through me. "The first time?" "Yes," he replied quietly. "And the second? And once? The third, I think. You were shaking then. Tonight you're calmer." His tone wasn't eerie or teasing. It was observational, gentle, almost concerned. That unsettled me more than if he'd been cryptic or evasive. This man truly thought he'd driven me before, multiple times, on the same route that I had no memory of ever taking. "Look," I said, trying to regain control of the situation. "If you're trying to scare me, it's working. But I need you to explain what you mean by first time. I don't remember any of this." "That's normal." "Normal? For passengers," he said. "Not for me." I looked back down at the ticket in my hand. The perforations formed a pattern, columns of numbers aligned too precisely to be random. The date printed in the corner read 03 NOV 1989. The ink was crisp, unstained by years. It wasn't a replica. It wasn't aged or yellowed. It was new. "How do you have a ticket from 6 years ago?" I asked. "It isn't from 6 years ago," he replied. "It's from where we're going." My breath caught. He said it so casually, like announcing the next stop. The bus slowed as we approached a small intersection. A traffic light blinked yellow, casting a dull glow through the fog. On the opposite corner stood a cafe I hadn't seen since I was a teenager, its original name still painted above the door. It had closed in '92. Yet here it was, lit, open, someone sweeping inside. "This can't be real," I whispered. The driver adjusted the mirror again, his eyes meeting mine for the first full second since we left the station. It's real enough, he said, just not real yet for you. And with that, the bus rolled forward, crossing a boundary I couldn't see, but could feel, like stepping into a memory that belonged to someone else. The road leveled out as we approached a quieter district, the kind of neighborhood where the buildings stood closer together and the sidewalks narrowed into thin strips of concrete. Everything felt eerily familiar, but not in the way a childhood memory returns. This was familiarity without context, recognition without source. I pressed my hand against the window, watching the droplets chase each other down the glass. Each time the headlights swept across a storefront or street sign, it revealed another detail that shouldn't have existed anymore. A movie poster taped to a lamppost advertised a premiere from late 1989. I remembered seeing that same poster when I was younger, the way the edges curled from humidity. Now it looked freshly placed, the paper bright, unstained. My pulse quickened. I pulled my gaze from the window and leaned back, trying to steady my breathing. "How many people have you taken there?" I asked quietly. The driver kept his eyes on the road. "Not many. Fewer than you'd think." "Why me?" The question slipped out before I could organize it. He hesitated, fingers tightening around the wheel for the first time. "Because you're one of the few who keep coming back. I don't remember coming back." "You never do." His voice softened, almost sympathetic. "But you always find the bus." That sentence lodged in my chest like a weight. I wanted to argue, tell him I'd never stepped foot on this route before tonight. But something inside me, something deeper than memory, hesitated. What if this wasn't the first time? What if this was just the first time I remembered? The bus slowed again, turning down a long residential avenue lined with small houses, each with a porch light glowing faintly through the mist. I recognized the street instantly, but not as it appeared now. The houses had paint colors long since changed, and the old maple tree that had been removed after a storm in 1994 stood tall again, leaves dripping with rain. "My God!" The words escaped under my breath. "You're seeing it," the driver said gently. "Not everyone does." "Seeing what?" "The overlap." He let the word linger in the space between us. I waited for him to elaborate, but he didn't. The bus cruised forward at a steady pace, as if giving me time to absorb the impossible tableau unfolding outside. A silhouette stood on one of the porches, a man stepping out to smoke, flipping a lighter in his hand. I leaned forward, narrowing my eyes. He looked familiar, too familiar. My stomach tightened. The man turned slightly, and for a brief second, the porch light hit his face. It was my neighbor from years ago, someone who had moved away in 1990, someone I hadn't thought about in ages. Here he was, alive in a moment I had lived through once, but had never expected to witness again. The driver spoke softly, almost reverently. "This is where the path reconnects." I swallowed hard. "Reconnects to what?" "To the version of you waiting on the other side," he said. "You'll understand soon." As the bus continued down the street, I felt a quiet tremor ripple through me, like a memory waking up before I was ready to face it. The houses faded behind us as the bus descended toward a part of the city I knew even more intimately, a stretch of road I had walked almost every evening during my early 20s. The familiarity struck me in quiet waves, each one soft at first and then strangely heavy, like remembering a song you haven't heard in years but somehow still know by heart. The street lamps here were older, their metal frames thicker, their bulbs casting a warm, amber glow instead of the colder light installed in the mid-90s. Everything had a softness to it that didn't belong to 1995. I pressed my hand to the glass again, letting the cold seep into my skin. It grounded me. It made the present, or whatever version of the present I sat in, feel a little more solid. The driver slowed as we approached an intersection I recognized instantly. There should have been a small pharmacy on the corner, the kind that stocked everything from cough syrup to school notebooks. But the sign above the door read a different name, one I remembered from years ago, before it became part of a larger chain. The old wooden door was back, its chipped paint exactly as I recalled it, though I hadn't seen it like this since the winter of 1989. I swallowed hard, clearing my throat. So this isn't just 6 years back. It's the actual year. As it was, the driver said. Not a copy, not a reconstruction. The street exactly as you left it. I didn't leave it, I murmured. You did, he replied softly. Every time. The bus rolled forward, and for a moment I forgot to breathe. A group of teenagers hurried across the street, laughing loudly as they shielded themselves from the rain with their jackets. Their clothes, their haircuts, the way one of them carried a cassette player. It was all unmistakably late 80s, untouched by the years that should have come after. I watched them disappear around the corner, my chest tightening. "I don't understand," I said. "Why show me this again? Why bring me here?" The driver's voice lowered, barely above the hum of the engine. "Because you always think you have time. 6 years feel like nothing until you step back into them." He paused, then added, "And because there's something you're trying to find, or perhaps something you're trying to correct." The words struck a nerve I hadn't expected. I leaned back, letting the seat hold my weight as the realization settled with a kind of quiet dread. Maybe this wasn't just a strange glitch of time. Maybe it was a return, a forced return to a chapter I had closed without ever looking back. The bus approached a narrow bridge, one I hadn't crossed in years. The rails looked newly painted, free of the rust that had eaten through them later on. My pulse quickened. A memory tugged at the edge of my mind, something faint, blurred, something I had forgotten or chosen to forget. The driver slowed, not enough to stop, but enough to acknowledge the moment. "You always hesitate here," he said. I stared at the bridge, a chill running through me. "Why?" He met my gaze in the mirror. "Because this is where the year starts to remember you." The bridge stretched ahead of us like a thin ribbon, its wet surface reflecting the headlights in long, trembling streaks. I remembered this place in fragments, crossing it on cold mornings, leaning on its railing during late walks home, hearing the river below when the winter ice began to break. But the memory that hovered now was different, more elusive, like a thought I had refused to entertain for years. Something about this bridge unsettled me in a way the rest of the city hadn't. As we crossed, the fog thinned, revealing houses on the far side that hadn't existed in this form for decades. The red brick building on the left was still a modest duplex, not the renovated apartment complex it would later become. A tiny grocery store stood on the right, its neon sign half lit, just as I remembered it from my early 20s. I felt the weight of time compressing around me, not like a loop, but like a funnel narrowing toward a single point. "Did something happen here?" I asked quietly, unable to pull my eyes from the railings. "It depends which version of you mean," the driver said. "Some nights, nothing happened. Other nights, this is where everything changed." A shiver climbed up my spine. Changed how? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he tapped the brake and let the bus glide slowly off the bridge. The street ahead was washed in orange light from old sodium lamps. A stray dog jogged across the road, pausing to look at us with a recognition that unsettled me even more than the driver's words. Animals, I had always believed, sensed things humans overlooked. Tonight, the dog's gaze lingered as if it had seen me before. "You're remembering pieces," the driver finally said. "I can hear it in your voice." "I'm not remembering anything," I insisted, though the words didn't feel true the moment they left my mouth. "You forget every time," he said, "but your mind tries to put the pieces back. It starts around here." I let the silence sit between us, heavy and unbroken. Rain began tapping lightly against the windows again, a gentler rhythm than before. It reminded me of nights spent waiting for someone who never arrived, someone whose absence grew more significant with each passing year. We turned onto a quieter residential street. Here the houses were closer together, their windows glowing softly. A woman stepped out onto her porch, shaking rain from her hair, carrying a stack of folded laundry. She looked young, far younger than she should have been if this were still 1995. I felt my breath hitch. I recognized her, not as she was now, but as she would be, in a future that hadn't happened yet, but one I had lived. I knew the way she laughed, the way she held herself when she was nervous, the way she frowned when she tried to understand something she couldn't explain. "What is this?" I whispered. "Why am I seeing her like this?" The driver's voice softened with something close to pity. "Because you didn't lose time," he said. "You left it behind." I gripped the seat in front of me, the truth pressing closer, no longer hidden in fog or distance. "And tonight," he added, "time finally came looking for you." The sight of her, alive in this version of the past, younger, untouched by the years that should have followed, left me with a feeling I couldn't place. Not longing, not fear, but something quieter, more fragile. A pressure behind the ribs, like remembering a warmth you once held without realizing how important it was. She stepped back inside with the laundry, unaware of the bus creeping past, unaware of me watching her from a future she would never reach. I pressed my fingertips to the cold window, drawn to the light spilling from her doorway. "How is she here?" I whispered. "She moved away in 91. I never saw her again." The driver's eyes flicked to the mirror. "Not in your timeline." "But this is my timeline," I insisted. "This is my past." He shook his head slightly. "It's a past, not the only one." My stomach tightened. "And you said I've been here before? Does that mean I've seen her before too? On these trips?" His silence confirmed more than any explanation could have. The bus rolled on, the neighborhood thinning into longer stretches of dimly lit road. I sat back, unable to shake the image of her. It hadn't been years since I'd last seen her. It had been decades. Decades of wondering what became of her, where she went, why her absence had carved a hollow I'd learned to live around. Yet here she was, alive in a year that no longer belonged to me. Memories I had ignored for years pressed their way forward. A conversation cut short. A promise neither of us kept. The simple kind of closeness that you only understand in hindsight. I shut my eyes, but it only made her younger face clearer. "You're thinking about the last time you spoke to her," the driver said gently. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. "She was important to you," he added. "She was..." I started, but the words wouldn't form. "I don't know. Maybe she was supposed to be." The driver nodded once, as if this aligned with something he already knew. "This route shows what you left unresolved. It always has." I stared at the back of his head. "Why me? There must be thousands of people who regret something from their past. Why bring me here?" He took a slow breath, steadying the wheel as we turned onto another street, one I knew even more intimately, the one that led to the old community field where I used to spend long evenings alone after work, thinking about decisions I never made. "Because you keep coming back," he said, "even when you don't remember doing it." A chill settled through me. "And why do I forget?" I asked. "Because remembering changes everything," he said softly. "And some timelines are fragile. They only exist because you've forgotten them." The bus slowed, the engine humming lower. Ahead, I recognized the entrance to the field, lit by a single street lamp that hadn't worked properly since the late 80s. Yet tonight, it burned brightly, waiting. "This is where you always get off," the driver said quietly. I stared at the door, my chest tightening. "And this is where the past starts asking its questions." The door hissed open with a soft exhale, releasing a wave of cold, damp air from outside. I hesitated at the top step, gripping the metal railing as though the bus might disappear the moment I set foot on the ground. The field lay ahead of me, exactly as it had been in late autumn of '89. Patchy grass, a cracked path leading to the benches, and a chain-link fence that rattled softly whenever the wind pushed through it. I hadn't stood here in years, yet every detail pulled me backward, as if the past were tightening a thread around my chest. "You can take your time," the driver said. His tone wasn't commanding or expectant. It was patient, painfully patient. "You always do." I stepped down onto the pavement, the gravel crunching under my shoes. The ground felt almost too familiar beneath my feet, like a memory greeting me physically. The air smelled of wet leaves and the faint metallic tang of the river nearby. A street lamp flickered overhead, illuminating the path in dim pulses. I used to sit on the far bench, the one facing the field, before everything in my life shifted in ways I no longer had words for. The bus door stayed open behind me, the interior lights glowing warmly. I glanced back at the driver, who watched me steadily, hands resting on the wheel. He didn't look concerned or tense. He looked expectant, as if he knew exactly what I was about to remember. I walked toward the bench, each step stirring a small cloud of old recollections. Nights spent thinking about choices I couldn't bring myself to make. Conversations that lingered unfinished. A moment, sharp, bright, and painful, that had left its imprint on me far longer than I ever admitted. As I neared the bench, a shape came into view. A silhouette seated at its far end. My breath caught. For a split second I thought it was another trick of the timeline, another impossible echo. But then the silhouette shifted, lifting a hand to brush rain from its sleeve. A person. Someone real. Someone waiting. "No," I whispered, my mind scrambling to make sense of what I saw. "That's not possible." I stopped a few yards away, heart pounding. The figure wore a dark coat, the same style I remembered from that winter. Their shoulders slanted in the same familiar way. Even before they turned, even before their face caught the dim glow of the street lamp, I knew who it was. It was me, a younger version, late 20s, tired in a way I remembered all too well, sitting exactly where I used to sit, staring at the field with the same quiet confusion I felt now. The driver spoke from behind me, his voice soft but unmistakably firm. This is the point where the timelines start to overlap. I stared at my younger self, frozen between disbelief and recognition. And this, he added, is why you keep coming back. I didn't move at first. I couldn't. My younger self sat hunched slightly forward, elbows resting on his knees, staring at the empty field as if trying to decipher something hidden in the darkness. I remembered that posture well, the way I used to fold in on myself when I felt lost, when words weren't enough to handle whatever I was carrying. Seeing it again from the outside felt like watching a stranger inhabit my old skin. He didn't notice me, or maybe he couldn't. The rain fell softly around him, catching in the strands of his hair, clinging to his coat. He looked exhausted, not physically, but in the way someone looks when they're holding on to something unspoken. I remembered being that tired. I remembered the reason for it. And yet, standing here now, years later, the full weight of that moment felt heavier than I'd expected. Behind me, the bus engine hummed quietly, a reminder that the driver was watching, waiting. He knew what this moment meant. I didn't, not fully, but something inside me recognized the shape of it, like an old scar aching with the memory of its wound. I took a cautious step forward. As I approached, snow began to mix with the rain, tiny white flecks dissolving before they hit the ground. I took another step and the air around me shifted, warmer somehow, more charged. My younger self inhaled sharply as if reacting to a sudden change in the atmosphere. His shoulders tensed. He turned his head slightly, though not enough to see me. He sensed something. I swallowed hard. "Hey," I whispered, though I knew he couldn't hear me. But he straightened. That was enough to tighten the knot inside my chest. A distant memory stirred. Me, sitting on that same bench in '89, feeling an unexplainable chill, looking around as though someone had just spoken my name. I'd always brushed it off as imagination. Now I wasn't so sure. I circled slowly around the bench, staying just outside the halo of light cast by the flickering lamp. My younger self rubbed his hands together, exhaling visibly in the cold evening air. He murmured something under his breath, too quiet for me to catch. But the tone I remembered. That night, I had been wrestling with a decision I never made. A decision that changed the course of the next 6 years. "You're remembering, aren't you?" The driver called softly from behind. I didn't turn. "Pieces," I said. "Just pieces." My younger self shifted again, turning his head slightly toward the path, toward where I stood. His eyes narrowed, scanning the shadows, sensing something impossible. We were separated by years, and yet the space between us felt paper thin. He stood. My breath hitched. His movements were jittery, confused, as though he felt the presence of someone who wasn't supposed to exist yet. He stepped toward me. I instinctively backed up. The cold air wavered between us, shimmering like heat rising from pavement. The street lamp flickered harder, casting long, warped shadows across the bench. Then, suddenly, he stopped. He looked right past me, toward the field, toward the place where, years later, everything in my life had shifted. And I knew then, this wasn't just a memory. This was the moment I'd been avoiding for 6 years. My younger self stood frozen at the edge of the field, as if something were calling to him from a distance I couldn't perceive. I followed his gaze, but the only thing I saw was the dim outline of the fence, the rain-softened grass, and the faint glow of a street lamp that never worked properly. Yet he was looking at that spot with an intensity I remembered vividly, a sense that the night was trying to tell him something. A memory slid into place, faint but sharp enough to sting. I remembered sitting on that field alone, hearing a sound I couldn't explain, a small echo, like a footstep behind me, though no one was there. At the time, I chalked it up to nerves or imagination, but now, standing here in the thick overlap of timelines, I wondered if that sound had been me, this version of me, standing in the shadows, watching, My younger self took a hesitant step into the field. I saw the tremor in his hand, the way he kept glancing over his shoulder, not toward me, but toward where he felt something, someone, out of place. "You see it now," the driver said behind me, having stepped off the bus without me noticing. His shoes barely made a sound on the wet pavement. "This moment has echoed through every timeline you've passed." I kept my eyes on my younger self. What was I doing? "Trying to decide," the driver murmured. "Decide what?" He didn't answer immediately, and I sensed that the truth wasn't something he could simply give. Instead, he stood beside me, both of us watching the younger man as he stopped near the middle of the field. He crouched, touching the wet grass as if expecting to find something beneath it, something lost. "I remember thinking I heard someone," I said softly. "You did." The confirmation sank deep, unsettling and strangely comforting at once. My younger self stood upright again, turning sharply as though startled by an invisible presence. He took 2 steps backward, breath quickening, eyes darting around the field. He wasn't seeing me, not fully, but he felt me. The tension in his shoulders, the uncertainty in his expression. I remembered that feeling too well. "This can't be healthy," I whispered. "Seeing him like this, seeing myself like this." The driver exhaled slowly. "You've been running from this night for years, but it stays with you in every timeline." The younger me wrapped his arms around himself, shivering. He looked so small then, smaller than I remembered being. That quiet loneliness I carried back then was more visible on him than it ever had been in my memory. You never realize how hollow you looked until you see it from the outside. "What did I lose here?" I asked. The driver didn't look at me. He kept his eyes on the young man trembling in the field. "Not what?" he said quietly. "Who?" A chill crawled down my spine, deeper than the cold night air. My younger self suddenly turned and ran, back toward the bench, toward the path, toward the life he had no idea was already shifting beneath him. I stepped forward instinctively, wanting to reach out, wanting to warn him, wanting to... The driver rested a hand on my shoulder. "You can't touch him," he said. "You can only remember him." I swallowed hard, feeling a knot form in my throat. "And this," he continued, "is only the beginning." My younger self vanished into the fog at the edge of the field, swallowed by a darkness that didn't belong to any particular year. The street lamp buzzed once, sputtering as though exhausted by the overlap of timelines. I took a step forward, feeling an ache settle in my chest, an ache I couldn't name, though it felt like something old and familiar returning after too long. The driver stayed beside me, his hands tucked into the pockets of his worn uniform jacket. "He won't go far," he said calmly. "He never does." "What exactly happened tonight?" I asked. My voice trembled despite my attempt to steady it. "You made a choice," he replied. "Or rather, you didn't." I frowned. "What does that mean?" He didn't answer. Instead, he began walking toward the opposite side of the field, his pace slow and deliberate. I followed without thinking, drawn more by the weight of his silence than by any clear sense of direction. As we moved, the fog seemed to thin before us, revealing faint outlines of places I hadn't seen in decades. The rusted bleachers, the bike racks where we used to lock our bicycles, the narrow trail leading toward the riverbank. A memory fluttered in the back of my mind. Something about this trail. I hadn't walked it since I was young. It used to be a shortcut to a cluster of small houses and a row of telephone poles that clicked in the wind. I hadn't thought of it in years. But the moment my foot touched the dirt path, recognition struck me hard. "I know this place," I whispered. "I walked here every night for a week. After..." The driver waited, watching me carefully. "After what?" he asked. The words hovered at the edge of my consciousness, but I couldn't reach them. Something inside me resisted, like a locked door refusing to open. I rubbed my forehead, trying to force the memory into focus. The air around us felt heavier, thicker, like the night itself was waiting for me to remember. We walked deeper into the trail, the sound of the river growing louder with each step. The moonlit water shimmered faintly through the trees. We emerged near the old wooden fence that marked the edge of the residential block, except the houses looked exactly as they had in 1989, untouched by renovations, glowing with their pale yellow porch lights. And then I saw her again. She stood on the small footpath near her back gate, her hair damp from the mist, her coat slightly open as if she had stepped outside in a hurry. She looked younger than I had seen her moments ago, closer to the age I remembered. Her expression was distant, troubled, as though she were searching for something she couldn't name. My breath caught. The ground felt unsteady. "She was here that night?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. The driver nodded. "You never forget the people who hold your years together," he said softly, "even when you think you've forgotten them entirely." She took a half step forward, glancing at the empty trail, not seeing me, but reacting to something, someone, the way my younger self had moments ago, and for the first time tonight, I felt the truth pressing through the fog. "This isn't just where I was," I whispered. "It's where you were supposed to stay." She stood in the faint glow of her porch light, the mist curling around her like a slow-moving tide. I remembered that coat, the way she used to fold the collar up against the cold, the way she always forgot to button the second button when she was in a hurry. Details I hadn't thought about in years surfaced with startling clarity, as if stepping into this timeline had unlocked a drawer in my mind I didn't realize I'd sealed shut. My younger self emerged from the trail a few moments later, cautious, unsettled from the field. He didn't see her at first. He paused near the fence, rubbing his hands together, trying to steady himself. Then she turned toward him, her expression softening with immediate concern, and in that instant, I felt something collapse inside me. I remembered this moment, not because I had lived it clearly, but because I had felt its absence for 6 years. She walked toward him, slow but certain, like someone who has made a decision and isn't afraid of the consequences. My younger self froze when he noticed her, surprise flashing across his face. He wasn't expecting her. He couldn't have been. Neither of them planned to meet here, not originally. This wasn't a scheduled moment. It was an interruption, an accident, a sliver of time that shifted everything afterward. I watched them from the shadows, the ache in my chest deepening with every step she took. "This is the night," the driver murmured beside me. "The night what?" I asked, though the question tasted hollow. "The night everything diverged," he said. "The night one version of you stayed, and another kept running." My breath shuddered out of me. Running from what? He didn't answer. Not yet, because the scene unfolding in front of us carried its own explanation. She reached my younger self and placed a hand on his arm. He startled, then relaxed, a reaction I remembered in vague, unsteady flashes. She said something. I couldn't hear it, but the softness in her voice was unmistakable. She was calming him down, grounding him, pulling him back from whatever fear had gripped him in the field. My younger self looked at her with a hesitation I recognized too well, a hesitation built from years of second-guessing the simplest choices. He said something back and she smiled, small, reassuring, a smile she saved only for people she trusted deeply. Even from here, even across years, that smile felt like a hand closing around my heart. "You cared for her," the driver said quietly. I shook my head. "No, it was more complicated than that. That's why you came back," he replied. Every time, my younger self looked down, staring at the wet ground. She reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. Not this time. The driver leaned closer. "This was the moment you changed her life, or were supposed to." I looked at them, two younger versions of lives I had abandoned, drifting into a night I once believed insignificant. "What did I do?" I whispered. The driver's response was almost a breath. "You left." And somewhere across the field, the memory of that choice echoed back through every year that followed. His words landed with a softness that made them hurt even more. "You left." A simple sentence, one that explained everything and nothing at the same time. I watched my younger self standing there with her, the rain softening into fine mist around them, their silhouettes framed by the pale porch light. He looked torn, half present, half ready to vanish. She looked steady, offering him something quiet and fragile, something I had once mistaken for temporary comfort. I remembered pieces of this night, but never clearly. I remembered the way she spoke, the sound of her voice cutting through the cold. I remembered how she listened, how she waited, and how I didn't know what to do with any of it. Seeing it now from the outside, the weight of my absence settled on me like a physical thing. The driver stood beside me, hands in his pockets. "You think leaving was a decision you made once," he said, "but I've seen it across timelines. It's a choice you keep making." "I didn't mean to hurt her," I said. "You didn't understand what she was offering," he replied, "or what you were running from." My younger self shifted nervously, glancing past her toward the darkness of the field, the same instinct to flee flickering in him. And yet, This version of him stayed rooted, as though something in her presence held him still. She spoke again, this time more earnestly, stepping closer. He looked down. She waited. I remembered that. The waiting. She always waited for me to step forward. The moment stretched, delicate as glass. My younger self finally spoke, and though I couldn't hear the words, I saw the way her expression changed, slightly hopeful, slightly afraid. She reached up, brushing rain from her hair, and laughed quietly. My younger self managed a small smile, the kind I'd forgotten I used to have. It didn't last. He took a step back. She noticed instantly. The hope dimmed from her eyes. She said something, short, sharp, not angry but pleading. He hesitated, torn between staying and disappearing into the night's uncertainty. "This is where it diverges," the driver murmured. I felt my whole body tense. "Which version is this? The one where I stayed? Or the one where I walked away?" The driver's gaze followed the younger me. "This is the moment before either path. The overlap shows you what you carried and what you abandoned, so you can understand the cost." My younger self stood trembling, caught between two futures he didn't know existed. She reached for his hand again. For a second, he didn't move. A second longer than I remembered. A second that felt like it could tip the entire night in either direction. Then he pulled away. Not abruptly, not unkindly, just enough. Enough to break something in both their faces. Enough to carve the divide that rippled through the years. "She didn't deserve that," I said, voice cracking. "No," the driver said quietly, "but neither did you." My younger self stepped back into the darkness. She stood alone, the fog swallowing her outline, and the past, finally, began to answer. The fog thickened again as my younger self disappeared into the night, swallowed by the very shadows he always trusted more than people. She remained for a moment longer, frozen in the half-light, her breath visible in the cold air. I watched her wrap her arms around herself and look down the path where he had vanished, as if she sensed even then that something had been taken from her future. Then she turned toward the house, shoulders slumped, and slipped inside. The porch light flickered once before steadying. I stood there for a long time, unable to move. The echo of that choice, my choice, hung in the air like a ghost that had waited 6 years to be acknowledged. I had told myself many stories about why we drifted apart, why I never saw her again after that winter, why our lives diverged so sharply. Seeing it unfold from the outside stripped away every comforting illusion I had built. I didn't leave because of timing, or stress, or fear of change. I left because I didn't stay. The driver walked a few steps ahead and waited for me to follow. There was no urgency in him, no expectation, just quiet patience, as though he'd guided me through this night more times than he could count. The timeline around us pulsed faintly, lights dimming and brightening, fog drifting like breath over glass. The world felt thin, fragile, as though it could fold inward on itself with a single wrong step. "You understand more now," he said when I finally approached him. "I understand I ruined something important," I replied. He tilted his head slightly. "Not ruined, lost. There's a difference. Does it matter? The result is the same." His gaze softened. "Loss is a path. Ruin is an ending. You're not at the end." I looked back at the house where she had stood moments ago. The windows were warm, glowing softly in the mist. I wanted to walk up the steps, knock on the door, tell her everything I had never said, but the fog shimmered faintly around the porch, reminding me that I didn't belong in that moment. Not truly. "When I left that night," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "what happened? To her, to me." "You walked away from her," he replied, "and time walked away from you." The words settled into me like a slow, deep ache. "What does that mean?" He gestured for me to follow as we walked back toward the bus. The street behind us seemed to unwind as we moved, lights dimming into older bulbs, the color of the pavement fading into the muted tones of late '89. The overlap was thinning. The night was deciding what it wanted to keep. "You didn't just leave her," the driver said. "You left the version of yourself who stayed, the one who chose connection over fear. That version kept living here, in this year." I stopped walking. "Are you saying there's another me, one who never left?" The driver gave the smallest nod. "And he's lived 6 years you've never known." My breath froze. "And tonight," he added quietly, is the first time you've ever come close to seeing him. The idea of another version of myself, one who stayed, who kept living the years I abandoned, landed with a heaviness I couldn't swallow. I stood still in the road, the mist curling around my shoes, and let the thought sink in. 6 years, 6 entire years of a life that should have been mine, occupied by someone who looked like me, moved like me, spoke like me, but made a choice I didn't. The driver watched my reaction carefully, as though gauging when the truth would begin to take shape. "The timeline didn't break when you left," he said. "It simply split. You walked forward, and the version of you who stayed walked deeper into this year." "Is he still here?" I asked before I could stop myself. "He exists," the driver replied. "Not here, not now, but in the branch that continued from this night." The cold air tightened in my lungs. And why am I the one being dragged back to see all of this? "You're not being dragged," he said gently. "You're returning. You always return." He began walking again, and I followed, my legs moving without permission. The city around us shifted subtly with each step, quiet ripples of time correcting themselves, pulling the edges of 1989 closer. Streetlights flickered into warmer tones. The pavement grew more uneven. The familiar hum of this old version of Quebec wrapped around me in a way that made the present feel thin, barely there. We reached a small crossroads where a payphone stood beneath a swaying tree. I recognized it instantly. I had used it countless times in the late 80s, calling friends, calling work, waiting for calls that never came. But one night I had stood at that phone longer than any other. I remembered the cold creeping through my coat, the sound of traffic far off, and the weight of indecision pressing against my chest. "Do you know what you were deciding here?" the driver asked. I swallowed. "I think so. You were deciding whether to go back to her house," he said. "Whether to knock on the door and explain why you walked away." My throat tightened. I remembered that night in fragments, the ringing phone that never connected, the words I rehearsed but never said. "If I had gone back," I murmured. "You would have stayed," he replied, "and the path ahead would have been different. Not better or worse, just different." I leaned against the cold metal of the payphone, letting the truth settle. "So why show me this now? What am I supposed to do with it?" The driver stepped closer, and for the first time, his expression carried something more than patience, something heavier. "Because your timelines are drifting apart," he said, "wider every year. Soon, the version of you who left may no longer be recognized by the year that remembers the one who stayed." I stared at him. "Recognized?" He nodded. "Time knows its own, and you belong to a year you abandoned, a year that still has questions for you." The fog thickened around us, swirling as though listening. "And if you don't face what you left behind," he added, "you may lose the path back entirely." The fog moved differently now, slower, almost deliberate, as if the night itself were waiting for something. I stepped away from the payphone, my fingers brushing against the cold metal one last time. 6 years lost, 6 years lived by someone who wasn't me. The thought spiraled in my mind with a weight I wasn't ready to carry. "What happens if I lose the path back?" I asked quietly. The driver took a long breath, the kind that signaled a truth he would rather soften but couldn't. "Then this version of the timeline," he said, gesturing toward the familiar streets around us, "keeps moving without you. And the version of you who stayed becomes the only one that matters." "You mean I disappear?" "No," he said gently. "You don't disappear. You drift. You become unanchored." He looked at me then, an expression of honest sympathy settling across his features. "There are passengers I've carried who never found their way back to where they belonged." A cold shiver ran through me. "Is that why I keep returning? Because I'm already losing the connection? Because something in you still remembers what you left?" he replied, "even if the memory hasn't taken shape yet." The wind shifted, pushing the mist down the street. Shapes blurred, buildings softened. The timeline was thinning again, loosening its grip. I could feel it in my chest, the pull of 1995 trying to reclaim me, and the tug of 1989 trying not to let go. "Where is he?" I asked suddenly. "The version of me who stayed." The driver didn't move. He studied my face as though deciding whether I was ready for the answer. "Close," he said finally. "Closer than you think." A shadow appeared at the far end of the street. Someone standing under a flickering lamp, posture familiar, silhouette unmistakable. My breath stalled. The driver didn't have to say anything. My heart recognized the shape before my mind caught up. My younger self, not the one from earlier, the older version, the one who stayed. He stood perfectly still, hands in the pockets of an older coat, watching the fog as though waiting for it to clear. His hair was shorter than mine, his shoulders slightly broader, his stance steadier. He looked like me, but he carried something I didn't, years I had never lived. I took a step forward, drawn to him by something deeper than curiosity. The driver raised a hand, stopping me gently. "Careful," he said. "He isn't meant to see you." "Why not?" "Because he is you," the driver replied softly. "The version who made the choice you didn't. If the timelines touch, neither of you will stay where you belong." I swallowed hard, watching the figure in the distance. He turned slightly as if sensing a shift in the air, the same instinct my younger self had felt on the field. He frowned, scanning the street, his gaze passing dangerously close to where I stood. The fog swirled thicker between us. "He's looking for something," I whispered. "No," the driver said. "He's looking for someone." I looked at him sharply. 6 years ago, the driver added. He never stopped. The other me took a slow step forward, eyes searching the night with quiet urgency. And for the first time I understood. I hadn't returned to see the past. The past had been trying to find me. I stood frozen between two versions of time, watching the man I could have become, searching through the fog for something he still refused to release. The driver guided me slowly back toward the bus, his hand a steady reminder that the boundary between timelines was thinning with every passing second. The air around us vibrated softly, the way a train platform does before the arrival of something enormous and unseen. I took one last look at him, at the life I had abandoned, and felt a quiet ache form where memory and regret finally met. He looked so close, close enough to call out to, but impossibly far in ways that defied distance. When I stepped onto the bus, the interior lights flickered, steadying only after the door closed behind me. The driver didn't speak at first. He simply shifted the bus into motion, letting the hum of the engine settle my breathing. The fog outside began to lose its shape, dissolving into streaks of light and shadow as the city folded itself back into the year it belonged to. Buildings regained their modern lines. Street lamps brightened. The world aged 6 years in silence. I held the perforated ticket in my hands, watching the printed date blur, smear, and finally disappear as if it had never been pressed into the paper at all. When the bus rolled back into Gare du Palais, the clock on the platform read 22:13 again, steady, unremarkable, the way time is when it isn't bending to greet you. I paused at the door, asking the question that had been rising in me since the night began. Will I remember this? The driver met my eyes in the mirror, his expression gentle and weighted with understanding. "Only what you're ready to," he said, "and only until the year calls you back." I stepped into the cold night, the station lights reflecting on the wet pavement, knowing that somewhere, 6 years behind me, someone with my face was still searching through the fog.